cultivating compassion beyond self-focus. You know, it's easy to live inside the small circle of me. My problems, my dreams, my pain, my goals. It's like we are all carrying around this invisible mirror, always checking, how does this affect me? What does this mean for me? But if you've ever had someone truly care for you, not because they had to, not because they were expecting anything back, but simply because they saw your humanity, then you've tasted the kind of connection that changes everything. That's compassion. And it begins the moment we take that mirror and turn it into a window. Compassion is not pity. It's not feeling sorry for someone from a safe distance. It's the courage to step out of your own story for a moment and enter theirs. To imagine the world from their eyes, to feel what they might be feeling, and to care enough to act. And here's the thing, when we step beyond self-focus, we don't actually lose ourselves. We find a deeper, truer version of who we are. But I get it. Life can feel overwhelming. You've got bills to pay, deadlines to meet, relationships to juggle. And compassion can seem like a luxury, something for when you have time or feel like it. Yet, some of the wisest teachers in history, from the Buddha to modern psychologists, agree that compassion isn't just good for others, it's good for you. It lowers stress, deepens relationships, and brings a quiet kind of joy that chasing personal gain can't touch. Think about it. How many times have you been lost in your own worries, replaying them in your mind like a stuck song, only to have those worries shrink the moment you help someone else? It's as if compassion is a secret door out of the prison of self-absorption. And it doesn't always require grand gestures. You don't have to quit your job and join a relief mission to live compassionately. Sometimes, it's as small as pausing when someone is speaking, and truly listening instead of mentally rehearsing your reply. It's holding the door for a stranger who's having a rough day. It's sending that just checking in text to a friend you haven't heard from in a while. There's an old Tibetan saying, "Be kind whenever possible. It is always possible." That line sticks with me because it's both comforting and challenging. Comforting because kindness isn't something reserved for saints. It's available to us in every single moment. Challenging because it forces me to ask, if it's always possible, why am I not doing it more often? Part of the answer is habit. We've been trained, by culture, by marketing, by the pace of modern life, to see ourselves as the center of the story. From the ads that tell us we deserve everything we want, to the way social media rewards self-promotion, it's easy to believe that life is primarily about our own comfort and success. But compassion invites us into a bigger story, one where our joy and the joy of others are intertwined. When we practice compassion, something subtle but profound happens. We start noticing the tired cashier who still manages a smile, the colleague who's unusually quiet today, the friend who laughs at everyone's jokes but never shares much about their own struggles. Suddenly, life isn't just about what I'm getting, but about what's really going on around me. And that shift changes how we show up in the world. Here's a simple practice you can try today. The next time you interact with someone, anyone, silently ask yourself, what might this person be carrying that I can't see? You won't always know the answer, but even asking the question softens the heart. It makes space for patience instead of irritation, generosity instead of judgment. Now, I'm not going to romanticize it. Compassion is not always easy. Sometimes it asks us to be present with pain we can't fix. Sometimes it requires us to set aside our own comfort for someone else's well-being. And sometimes it gets messy. But in those moments, we are reminded that compassion isn't about being perfect, it's about being willing. One of the greatest misunderstandings about compassion is that it's selfless to the point of self-neglect. But the truth is, real compassion starts with including yourself in the circle of care. You can't pour from an empty cup. If you're running on fumes, burned out, and bitter, your so-called compassion will be laced with resentment. But when you care for yourself, you create the energy and stability to truly care for others, not from obligation, but from overflow. And here's where the magic happens. The more we live beyond self-focus, the more connected and alive we feel. The walls between me and you start to soften. We realize that suffering is universal, and so is the longing to be understood. Compassion becomes not just something we do, but something we are. So maybe today, you and I can experiment with this. Let's take just one interaction, one conversation, one moment, and make it about seeing the other person fully. Not as a background character in our life, but as the main character in theirs. Let's listen without rushing. Let's notice without judging. Let's give without calculating the return. Because at the end of the day, Our legacy won't be the titles we held, the things we owned, or the likes we collected. It will be the lives we touched. The moments when someone, somewhere, felt less alone because we dared to step outside ourselves and into their world. Compassion is the bridge. And every time we cross it, the world feels a little less divided and a little more like home. What if I told you that focusing less on yourself could actually make you happier and more connected? It sounds counterintuitive, right? We live in a world that constantly tells us, put yourself first, protect your interests, chase your dreams. And sure, self-care matters, but ancient wisdom and modern science are starting to agree on something surprising. When we step out of the tight circle of me, we don't just help others, we unlock a deeper happiness for ourselves. Today, I want to take you on a journey into the heart of compassion, not the soft, sentimental kind we see on greeting cards, but the kind that rewires the way you see yourself, other people, and the whole flow of life. The mirror and the window. Let's start here. Most of us go through our days holding up an invisible mirror. We look at events, conversations, even problems through one main question. How does this affect me? When things go well, we smile at our reflection. When things go wrong, we frown, adjust, try again. But compassion asks us to do something radical, to put down the mirror and pick up a window, to look beyond our own reflection and see into the world of another human being. Imagine walking through your day as if every person you met had a secret chapter in their life story that you could glimpse, if only you cared enough to look. The science behind the ancient wisdom. This isn't just spiritual poetry, it's backed by research. Neuroscientists have found that when we act compassionately, our brains release oxytocin, the bonding hormone, which reduces stress and increases feelings of trust and belonging. Studies even show that compassionate people tend to live longer, with better overall mental health. It's almost ironic. We spend so much energy chasing happiness for ourselves, when one of the most reliable ways to find it is to give happiness away. Everyday compassion, it's not grand gestures. Now, I know what you might be thinking. I'm not a monk or a saint. I don't have time for massive acts of charity every day. And you don't need to. Compassion isn't always about rescuing someone from a burning building. It's often about the smallest, quietest choices, like choosing to actually listen when someone's speaking, without rehearsing your reply in your head, like noticing the tired cashier at the grocery store and saying, "I hope your day gets better," like sending a quick thinking of you message to a friend who's been distant. These aren't heroic acts, they're human acts. And yet, in a world that moves fast and stays distracted, they can feel like miracles. The habit of mis-centered thinking. One reason compassion feels rare is because we've been conditioned to keep the focus on ourselves. From advertisements that whisper you deserve this, to social media feeds built around our likes, our followers, our brand, modern life trains us to see the self as the main character and everyone else as supporting cast. But here's the thing, everyone you meet is living their own main character story. And compassion is the moment you step into their scene, even for a few seconds, and treat it with the same importance as your own. A gentle challenge. Here's something I challenge you to try today. The next time you talk to someone, anyone, silently ask yourself, what might this person be carrying that I can't see? You may not get an answer, but even asking the question changes you. It slows your judgment. It softens your impatience. And it opens a door for kindness to walk in. The discomfort of real compassion. Let's be honest, compassion isn't always comfortable. Sometimes it means sitting with someone's pain without being able to fix it. Sometimes it requires us to give up a little of our time, energy, or comfort. And sometimes it brings us face to face with suffering we'd rather avoid. But avoiding discomfort has never been the path to deep fulfillment. In fact, the moments when compassion feels hardest are often the moments when it's doing its deepest work, stretching our hearts beyond the cramped space of self-interest, including yourself in compassion. And here's something many people forget. Real compassion isn't about erasing yourself from the equation. If you neglect your own needs entirely, what you give to others will eventually be laced with exhaustion or resentment. Compassion starts with including yourself in the circle of care, so that what you offer others comes from overflow, not depletion. Think of it like tending a fire. If you don't keep adding wood, the flame dies out. Self-care is adding wood. Compassion for others is sharing the warmth. Both are needed for the fire to keep burning. The shift in perspective. The more we practice compassion, the more our perspective shifts. We begin to notice things we used to overlook, The subtle changes in a friend's tone, the quiet bravery in a stranger's eyes, the fact that everyone, every single person, is fighting battles we know nothing about. Life becomes richer, not because we get more, but because we see more. The edges between me and you blur a little, and that's where true connection begins. So here's my invitation. Today, find one moment to step outside yourself. One moment to see someone else not as an obstacle, a background character, or a means to an end, but as a whole, living, breathing human being with their own dreams, fears, and struggles. It could be the barista who hands you your coffee, the coworker who seems distracted in the meeting, the neighbor you pass without a word. Whoever it is, take the mirror down, look through the window, and just for that moment, really see them. Because the truth is, our greatest legacy won't be the things we've collected, the titles we've held, or the goals we've achieved. It will be the lives we've touched. And every time we choose compassion over self-focus, we are quietly building a world where connection is possible, and where happiness isn't something we chase, but something we create together. Forget what you think you know about true connection. The biggest myth we've been sold? That it starts with me. For decades, self-help books, motivational talks, and even popular psychology have drilled one message into our heads: work on yourself first, and everything else will fall into place. And while there's truth in self-awareness and self-care, there's a dangerous side to this idea. It quietly places you at the center of the universe. Every interaction, every relationship, becomes filtered through the lens of my needs, my growth, my journey. Without realizing it, we start treating people as mirrors rather than as whole human beings. But what if I told you, true connection doesn't begin with me at all? In fact, the deepest bonds are born when we step beyond ourselves. Let me share a small story. A friend once told me about a trip she took to a rural village overseas. She didn't speak the language, she didn't know anyone there, and she had nothing in common with the people she met. Yet, in a single afternoon, sitting on a wooden porch, sharing freshly cooked bread with an elderly woman she just met, she felt more seen and understood than in years of conversations back home. No self-introduction, no long explanations. Just presence. Just care. That's when it hit her. Connection isn't built on self-focus. It's built on shared humanity. This is the ancient secret that compassionate traditions have whispered for centuries. When you release the grip on your own story and step into someone else's world, even for a moment, you tap into something timeless. In Buddhism, this is called interbeing, the understanding that we are not separate, but threads woven into the same fabric of life. Think about it. The most memorable moments of human warmth in your life probably didn't come from a perfectly scripted conversation about yourself. They came when someone listened without judgment, when they noticed the subtle emotion in your eyes, when they placed a hand on your shoulder without needing to fix you. In those moments, you weren't just heard, you were held. And here's the paradox: by forgetting yourself, you actually find a deeper sense of self. When your attention turns outward, your heart opens inward. You begin to experience a kind of freedom, from comparison, from ego, from the exhausting need to constantly perform who you are. Now, I'm not saying you should ignore your own needs or become some kind of emotional doormat. No. Healthy connection requires boundaries. But boundaries are not walls, they are doors. And doors can open. The moment you allow someone else's experience to matter as much as your own, the air between you changes. Trust begins to grow. Compassion finds fertile ground. Here's a question for you. When was the last time you truly listened to someone? Not just waiting for your turn to speak, not silently rehearsing your own story, but really hearing them. What would happen if, for the next week, you made it your mission to step beyond yourself in every conversation? I can tell you what might happen. You'll notice details you used to miss, the way a friend's voice softens when they talk about their childhood, the way your coworker's eyes light up when they feel understood, the way strangers respond when they realize you're genuinely curious, not just polite. You'll also notice something in yourself, a calmness. Because when you're no longer trapped in the loop of me, you create space for empathy, for patience, for real understanding. That space is where true connection lives. This is why compassion is not just a moral ideal, it's a survival skill for the soul. The world is loud, fast, and increasingly self-absorbed. Social media trains us to market ourselves, to measure worth in likes and follows. But genuine connection, it refuses to be quantified. It asks you to pause, to put the phone down, to look into someone's eyes and say, without words, I'm here. I see you. I once heard a Zen teacher say, "If you want to know yourself, forget yourself, serve others." At first, that sounded poetic but impractical. But over time, I understood. Service doesn't just mean volunteering at a shelter or donating to charity. It can mean noticing when someone is struggling to carry their groceries and lending a hand. It can mean remembering a friend's important day and sending them a message. It can mean listening without giving advice. These moments, small, quiet, almost invisible, are where human bonds are forged. And here's the kicker. This way of living doesn't just make others feel good. It transforms you. Neuroscience now confirms what spiritual traditions have taught for millennia. Acts of compassion light up the brain's reward systems, reducing stress, boosting mood, and even improving physical health. In other words, stepping beyond yourself doesn't drain you, it replenishes you. So maybe it's time we rewrite the myth. True connection doesn't start with self-focus. It starts when we allow ourselves to dissolve, just a little, into the life of another. When we realize that my joy is tied to your joy, that my freedom is tangled up in your freedom, something shifts. We begin to live less like isolated islands and more like a flowing river, connected, moving, alive. And in a world that often feels fractured, divided, and lonely, perhaps this is the most radical act we can commit, to step beyond ourselves and into each other. So here's my challenge to you. For the next 24 hours, in every conversation, ask yourself, how can I make this moment less about me and more about us? Try it. You may just find that the connection you've been chasing has been waiting for you all along, not inside your own story, but in the space where your story meets someone else's. Because that's where genuine connection blooms. And that's where we remember, we were never meant to live life alone. Imagine a world where every interaction you have feels genuine. Where conversations leave you feeling lighter, not drained. Where your relationships feel deeper, more grounded. And where your sense of inner peace isn't fragile, it's unshakable. Now here's the twist. What if the key to all of this wasn't about fixing yourself, polishing your image, or climbing some endless ladder of self-improvement? What if the real transformation came from a surprising shift in perspective, one that takes you beyond yourself? This is where compassion steps in. Not the Hallmark card kind of compassion that's all warm words and smiles. I'm talking about compassion as an ancient, living practice, one powerful enough to rewire the way you experience life. For centuries, spiritual traditions from Buddhism to indigenous wisdom have taught that the heart's greatest strength is found when we stop obsessing over me and begin to truly see us. And yet, in the modern world, we've been trained to do the exact opposite. We are told to work on ourselves, focus on our goals, and prioritize our needs. Of course, self-care matters, but if that's all we focus on, we risk turning inward so far that we lose sight of the world beyond our own reflection. Let me tell you a story. Years ago, I met a man named Javier while traveling. He was a fisherman in a small coastal town. We had nothing in common, not the same language, background, or life experience. One morning, as the sun was rising, he handed me a cup of coffee and simply sat beside me. We didn't speak much, but he pointed out the waves, the changing colors of the sky, the way the wind shifted. I realized that in those silent moments, without talking about myself at all, I felt deeply connected, not just to him, but to life itself. That's the strange, almost counterintuitive truth. The more you focus on understanding someone else's world, the more you feel a part of your own. Compassion pulls you out of the exhausting cycle of self-comparison. You know the one, always measuring your worth against someone else's success, their appearance, their achievements. But when you shift your focus outward, you step into a place where connection matters more than competition. And this is where the magic happens. Neuroscience now shows that compassion activates the same brain regions associated with pleasure and reward. It reduces stress hormones. It even strengthens the immune system. This means that compassion doesn't just benefit others, it literally makes you healthier, calmer, and happier. Here's the thing, though, compassion is not pity. It's not feeling sorry for someone. True compassion is the willingness to enter another person's reality without judgment. It's the courage to sit with their pain without trying to fix it immediately, and to share their joy without feeling the need to claim credit for it. You might be wondering, in a busy, often chaotic world, how do we actually live this way? Start small. Next time you're in a conversation, notice if you're silently preparing your next sentence instead of really listening. Pause. Look at the person in front of you. Ask a question that invites them to go deeper. Let your attention be a gift, not a transaction. If you're with a friend, pay attention to the details, the way their tone shifts when they talk about something that matters, or how their eyes brighten when they feel understood. These little moments are where compassion grows roots. And if you want to test just how powerful this can be, try it with someone you disagree with. Not to win an argument, but to understand their perspective. You might not change your mind, but you might change the energy between you. Buddhism teaches that we are not separate beings. We are interwoven like threads in the same tapestry. Your well-being and mine are connected. My freedom is tied to yours. When you live with that awareness, compassion stops being a noble extra and becomes a necessity, like breathing. But here's the personal truth I've discovered. Compassion is not just about kindness to others. It's also a mirror that shows you where you've been hard on yourself. Because when you practice seeing others without judgment, you begin to see yourself the same way. You realize you don't have to be perfect to be worthy of love or connection. Imagine how different your life could feel if your relationships weren't a constant performance, if you didn't have to manage your image every second. Imagine the peace that would come from simply being present, with yourself, with others, with the world as it is. The reality is, we live in a time that rewards self-promotion, but what our souls crave is mutual recognition. And compassion gives us that. It's the quiet bridge between hearts, the invisible thread that makes a crowd feel like a community. So here's my invitation. For the next 24 hours, in every interaction you have, shift the focus from how do I look to how can I connect. It might feel strange at first, but watch what happens. Watch how people soften when they feel seen. Watch how you begin to breathe easier, because you're no longer carrying the burden of being the center of every story. In a world that's constantly telling us to look inward, maybe the most radical thing we can do is look outward. To step beyond self-focus, not as an act of self-sacrifice, but as an act of self-liberation. Because when you live from that place, you discover that compassion isn't just something you give, it's something you are. And that, my friend, can change everything. The empathy deficit, why we feel so alone. It's one of the strangest paradoxes of our time. We have never been more connected, and yet we've never felt more alone. Our phones buzz, our social feeds refresh endlessly, we can talk to someone across the world in seconds, and still, so many of us lie awake at night feeling unseen, unheard, untouched by genuine connection. Why is that? We scroll through endless posts, double tap, drop quick comments, but ask yourself, when was the last time you felt truly understood by another human being? When was the last time someone leaned in, looked you in the eyes, and listened without checking their phone, without drifting into their own thoughts, without waiting for their turn to speak? Somewhere along the way we connect got replaced by the way we perform. We live in a me-first culture, a culture that glorifies self-optimization, always pushing us to be better, faster, more successful, more attractive. It tells us to wake up earlier, work harder, track every habit, and package our lives for public display. And while self-improvement can be empowering, there's a shadow side. When the self becomes the constant focus, everyone else fades into the background. We start comparing ourselves to the curated highlight reels of others. We measure our worth against likes, comments, and follow accounts. And without realizing it, we build emotional silos, isolated little towers where it's all about my progress, my struggles, my achievements. The we disappears, replaced by an endless loop of me. The hidden cost. It's not just loneliness. It's anxiety, because constant self-comparison is a thief of peace. It's resentment, because when life feels like a competition, someone else's win feels like your loss. And it's a shallow, fragile version of happiness, the kind that depends entirely on how you stack up today compared to yesterday, or compared to someone else. This isn't how human connection was meant to work. We are wired for empathy, for sitting around fires sharing stories, for working together in gardens and kitchens and fields, for holding each other's babies and carrying each other's burdens. But in the race to become our best selves, we've neglected our whole selves, and part of being whole is being woven into the lives of others. Let me share something I witnessed. I was sitting in a small cafe one afternoon when I noticed an elderly man and a young woman at the table beside me. She was clearly his granddaughter. They didn't have their phones out. They weren't multitasking. He was telling her about the time he met her grandmother, and she was leaning in, smiling, asking questions. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't Instagram-worthy. But the air around them felt warm. And I thought, this is what we are starving for. Not more tips on productivity. Not another self-improvement checklist. But moments like this, undistracted, human, shared. When empathy dies, relationships become transactions. We talk to people only as long as they're useful to our goals, our image, our sense of self-worth. And in doing that, we starve ourselves of the very thing that could make our lives rich. If we want to heal this empathy deficit, we have to shift our focus outward. That doesn't mean neglecting ourselves. It means expanding ourselves, letting our attention rest on the lives of others not as a distraction from our own, but as a doorway to deeper living. Ask yourself, when was the last time you really paid attention to someone else's story without thinking about how it related to yours? When was the last time you celebrated someone's joy without comparing it to your own life? The truth is, empathy is an antidote to the modern plague of isolation. It says, I see you. Your life matters to me. And here's the beautiful part. The moment you offer that to someone else, you start to feel it for yourself. Because connection is reciprocal. You cannot light another person's path without brightening your own. Yes, the world is noisy. Yes, we are all busy. But what if, even for a few minutes a day, you chose to pause the endless self-audit and tune into someone else's frequency? What if your worth wasn't measured by your latest achievement, but by the quality of presence you bring into a room? That shift, from inward obsession to outward openness, can dissolve the loneliness that hyperconnectivity has failed to cure. So maybe the real self-improvement we need isn't another hack, another app, another routine. Maybe it's relearning how to sit with each other, to look at someone and think, you matter more than my next notification. Because in the end, the cure for loneliness isn't found in the glow of a screen. It's found in the glow of shared humanity, and that starts with empathy. From self-reflection to shared reality. We live in a time where self-reflection is celebrated as the ultimate path to growth. Journals, meditation apps, self-help books stack high on bedside tables. And yes, looking inward matters. But here's the part that almost no one talks about. There's a thin line between healthy self-awareness and exhausting self-obsession. Cross that line, and instead of finding freedom, you might find yourself trapped in the echo chamber of your own mind. The truth? The more you circle around yourself, the more you lose sight of the bigger picture, the living, breathing world outside your head. And ironically, the moment you loosen your grip on that constant self-monitoring, the more control you actually gain over your emotional state. Let me explain. When we're obsessed with analyzing our every thought, reaction, and feeling, we often end up magnifying problems. A small disappointment turns into a personal failure. A single awkward interaction replays in our minds for hours. It's like living with a camera constantly pointed at you. You become hyper-aware, self-critical, and less present. But when you shift your gaze outward, when you focus on the people around you, the stories they carry, the quiet beauty in their small gestures, something changes. The volume of your own inner critic turns down. Your emotional balance begins to stabilize. You start responding to life instead of overreacting to it. And there's a reason for this that goes deeper than philosophy. It's biology. Neuroscience tells us that our brains are hardwired for empathy. When we see someone smile, neurons in our brain fire as if we were smiling. When we see someone in pain, the same pain processing regions in our brain light up. This is not a poetic metaphor. It's a measurable fact. Human beings are built to connect, to feel with each other, to share emotional space. But here's the danger. When we ignore this wiring, when we live in isolation or let self-focus dominate our days, we starve those neural pathways. It's like a muscle that weakens when unused. And the result? Loneliness, anxiety, a persistent feeling that something's missing, even if life looks good on paper. I learned this the hard way. Years ago, I went through a season where I was deeply focused on fixing myself. Every day, I journaled about my moods, tracked my habits, evaluated my goals. It felt productive, until I realized I was barely speaking to my friends, barely noticing the people I passed on the street. My world had shrunk to the size of my own head. And instead of feeling better, I felt smaller. It wasn't until I started deliberately shifting my attention outward that things changed. I began with something simple. Mindful observation. On the subway, instead of scrolling my phone, I watched the way a mother soothed her restless toddler. In a cafe, I noticed how the barista remembered a customer's order without being asked. These tiny moments reminded me that life wasn't happening in me, it was happening around me. And I could be a part of it. That's where the practice of recognizing shared humanity comes in. It's the ability to see a stranger and think, they have dreams, fears, people they love, just like me. It's the understanding that the person cutting you off in traffic might be late to pick up their sick child. Or that the cashier who seems distracted might be dealing with something heavy at home. This shift doesn't just make you kinder, it makes you calmer. Because when you interpret people's actions through empathy instead of judgment, your own stress softens. And here's the beautiful paradox. The less you obsess about your own emotional state, the more stable it becomes. By stepping into shared reality, you give your brain what it's been craving all along: connection. That's when you realize that control over your emotions isn't about micromanaging them. It's about placing them in a bigger context. Of course, this doesn't mean abandoning self-reflection. It means balancing it. Imagine a scale. On one side is the inner work, understanding your triggers, your values, your needs. On the other is the outer work, listening deeply, observing without judgment, seeing yourself as part of a greater human story. When both sides are in harmony, you stop feeling like a solitary island and start feeling like a vital part of an interconnected ocean. So here's something you can try today. The next time you walk into a room, whether it's a meeting, a cafe, or your own kitchen, pause for just a moment. Look at the people there. Really look. Notice a detail, the way someone's shoulders slump with fatigue, the sparkle in someone's eyes when they laugh. Ask yourself, what's their story? You might never know the full answer, but the act of wondering shifts your perspective. It moves you from self-reflection into shared reality. And when you live this way, you start to see that power isn't found in controlling every thought or perfecting every mood. Power is found in connection, in the simple, daily practice of remembering that you and the people around you are made of the same fragile, miraculous humanity. Because at the end of the day, happiness isn't built in isolation. It's built in the spaces between us, in the shared moments, the mutual understanding, the quiet empathy that bridges one heart to another. The practice of proactive compassion. We've all heard the phrase, "I feel for you." It's comforting, isn't it? Someone acknowledging your pain. But let's be honest, empathy alone doesn't always change much. Feeling for someone is one thing. Acting with them? That's where the real transformation happens. Because empathy can be passive. You stand at a distance, you feel sad, maybe you send thoughts and prayers. But compassion moves your feet. It gets your hands dirty. It says, I won't just feel your struggle, I'll step into it with you. And here's the truth. That shift from passive empathy to proactive compassion is what changes lives. I think about a man named James, a mechanic in a small town. One winter, he heard about a single mother whose car had broken down. She was juggling 2 jobs, barely making rent, and the repair bill was more than her monthly paycheck. Now, James could have said, "That's tough, I hope it works out." Instead, he called her, towed the car himself, and fixed it after hours, free of charge. No publicity. No good guy Instagram post. Just quiet, decisive action. And here's what's beautiful. A week later, that same mother started organizing a coat drive for kids in her neighborhood. Why? Because when someone shows up for you in a moment of need, it plants something in you, a desire to keep that chain going. That's the ripple effect of compassion. You've probably felt it yourself. Someone does something unexpectedly kind for you, and suddenly, your whole day shifts. You smile more. You hold the door for a stranger. You give a little extra patience to the cashier who's clearly had a long shift. One act starts multiplying, quietly, invisibly, until it's touched dozens of lives. And science backs this up. Psychologists call it moral elevation, the uplifting feeling you get when you witness kindness. It's not just emotional, it's chemical. Your brain releases oxytocin, the bonding hormone, and you become more likely to act generously yourself. Compassion is contagious in the most literal way. The challenge, of course, is that our culture often stops at empathy. We think, well, I feel bad for them, and that's enough. But imagine if firefighters only felt bad when they saw smoke. If doctors only felt bad when they heard about an illness. Feeling is the spark, action is the fire. So how do we move into proactive compassion in our own lives without overcomplicating it? It starts small, really small. Next time you notice someone carrying a heavy grocery bag, don't just think, that looks rough. Offer to help. If a friend is going through a tough season, don't just say, I'm here if you need me. Show up at their door with dinner. When a coworker misses a deadline because they're overwhelmed, instead of complaining, ask, what can I take off your plate? These moments don't have to be grand or expensive. In fact, the most impactful acts of compassion are often the quietest ones. The handwritten note, the unexpected phone call, the simple act of listening, really listening, without checking your phone. And yes, it takes effort. It takes noticing. It takes choosing to break out of the bubble of your own concerns and step into someone else's world for a moment. But here's the thing, when you practice proactive compassion, it doesn't just help others, it reshapes you. You start walking through life with a different posture. You're more observant, more patient, less consumed by your own anxieties because your focus isn't locked inward anymore. And over time, you begin to trust something profound, that your presence, your choices, your seemingly small actions matter. I've seen this ripple effect in my own life. Years ago, a stranger paid for my coffee when I'd forgotten my wallet. It wasn't the money that moved me, it was the unspoken message, you're worth caring about, even if I don't know you. That tiny moment stayed with me for weeks, and without even realizing it, I started looking for ways to pass that feeling forward, covering a meal for someone, helping a neighbor carry furniture, even just greeting people more warmly. Here's what I learned. Proactive compassion doesn't just create better moments. It creates better people. And better people build better communities. So maybe the question we should ask ourselves isn't, do I care? Because most of us do. The real question is, how will I show it? Because when we move beyond passive empathy, when we step into that space where we don't just feel for others but act with them, we begin to change the texture of the world we live in. One choice at a time. And if you've ever doubted the impact of a single act, remember this, the ripples are bigger than you can see. You might think you're just helping one person in one moment, but somewhere down the line, that kindness may spark a decision, inspire a project, save a relationship, or even a life. The world doesn't need more observers of suffering. It needs more participants in compassion. That can be you. It can start today. And it can be as simple as looking around and asking, where can I step in? Because the truth is, the smallest act you do for someone else could be the moment that changes everything. For them, for you, and for everyone your ripple eventually touches. Compassion's power, reshaping your world. If you've been human for more than about 5 minutes, you know this truth. Life is full of friction. Arguments with people you love. Disagreements at work. Misunderstandings that turn simple conversations into battlefields. But here's the twist we often forget. The most effective way to transform conflict isn't to win it. It's to approach it with compassion. Now, I know. That sounds almost counterintuitive. When someone challenges you, your instinct is to defend, to protect your point, to stand your ground. But here's the thing. When we meet disagreement with compassion instead of aggression, something unexpected happens. The tension starts to dissolve. I once watched two neighbors go from nearly suing each other over a property line to having barbecues together every summer. What changed? One of them decided to stop defending and start listening. He didn't just hear the words. He listened for the fear, the frustration, the unmet need behind them. And when you acknowledge someone's deeper feelings, you give them something more valuable than agreement. You give them dignity. That's where resolution begins. Compassion doesn't mean you back down or pretend there's no problem. It means you step into the moment with a different goal. Not how can I win, but how can we understand each other? And when that's your starting point, resolution becomes not only possible, but natural. But compassion's power goes way beyond conflict. It's the hidden ingredient that makes friendships last decades. It's what turns romance from a spark into a steady fire. It's what keeps family ties from breaking when life gets hard. Think about your closest relationships. The moments you remember most are rarely the perfect days. They're the time someone saw you at your lowest and stayed. When you messed up and they chose patience over punishment. When they put themselves in your shoes, even if your choices didn't make sense to them. Compassion deepens connection because it reminds us that we are more than our mistakes, more than our moods, more than our worst days. When someone treats you with compassion, you feel safe to be your full, unfiltered self. And when you offer that same compassion back, the bond between you grows stronger, steadier, and more resilient. I think we often underestimate how rare that is. We live in a world obsessed with performance, image, and comparison. Everyone's curating their highlight reel. But compassion cuts through that. It says, I see you, the real you, and you're still worthy of care. That's a gift most people aren't getting enough of. And here's the part that might surprise you. practicing compassion doesn't just change your relationships, it changes your inner world. There's a kind of peace that comes from connection, not from self-absorption, but from seeing yourself as part of something bigger. When your focus shifts from me to we, your nervous system starts to calm down. You're less triggered by small frustrations. You recover from stress faster. You even sleep better. Neuroscientists have found that compassionate action activates parts of the brain linked to joy and reward. It's like your mind is wired to feel good when you're doing good. And that's not a coincidence. Humans evolved to thrive in community, not isolation. Compassion is one of the ways nature keeps us connected. I've felt it in my own life. There was a time when I was caught in a loop of overthinking. Everything was about my own goals, my own problems, my own fears. It was exhausting. But when I started volunteering at a local shelter, something shifted. For a few hours each week, my mind was focused on other people's needs. And strangely enough, that's when I started to feel lighter. My problems didn't vanish, but they stopped feeling so heavy. Because compassion has this way of expanding your perspective. When you see someone else's struggle, you remember that the world is bigger than your worries. And when you actively choose to help, you stop feeling powerless. That's where inner peace begins, not when life is perfect, but when you realize you can still bring light into it, even with the imperfections. So here's the question worth asking. What would change in your life if compassion became your default setting? Would arguments with your partner feel less like battles and more like problem solving? Would your friendships survive the rough patches instead of fading away? Would your days feel calmer, not because you eliminated all the stress, but because you stopped carrying it alone? The truth is, compassion isn't just a nice-to-have trait. It's a skill, one you can practice, strengthen, and apply in every area of your life. And the more you use it, the more you'll see the world, and yourself, differently. Because here's the secret. Compassion reshapes reality. It turns strangers into allies, conflicts into collaborations, and restless hearts into peaceful ones. It's not magic. It's not theory. It's a choice. One you can make today. One that might just change everything. Your compassion journey, a call to action. We've talked about compassion as a concept. We've explored its power to transform conflict, deepen relationships, and bring peace into our own lives. But here's the truth. None of that matters unless you actually live it. So today, I want to give you something practical. Something you can start right now, not next week, not when life slows down, but today. Because compassion isn't a theory. It's a daily choice. Daily challenges. Practicing compassion in real life. Let's start small. Tomorrow morning, when you step into your day, maybe before you even check your phone, try this. First, think of one person you know who might be having a hard time. Not your closest friend necessarily. It could be a coworker you barely talk to, a neighbor you only wave to in passing, or even the person who makes your coffee. Send them a short message. Ask how they're doing. Not how are you, in the throwaway way, but really ask. Mean it. Second, pick one interaction today where you consciously slow down. Instead of rushing through the conversation while thinking about your to-do list, pause. Listen not just to the words, but to the tone, the emotion underneath. What's the story they're not telling you? Third, before you go to bed tonight, ask yourself, did I help someone feel seen today? If the answer is yes, take a moment to let that sink in. If the answer is no, don't judge yourself. Just make a mental note to try again tomorrow. It's amazing how these tiny acts, almost invisible from the outside, can start to shift the atmosphere of your life. Beyond this video, your next step. The internet is full of inspiring content, but here's the trap. Inspiration without action is just entertainment. You might nod along, feel a little warm inside, and then go right back to old habits. If you want this to stick, surround yourself with people who share the same intention. Find a community, online or in your neighborhood, where compassion is part of the culture. That could mean joining a volunteer group, a local mindfulness class, or even an online forum where people support each other through life's challenges. I've seen this firsthand. When you're around people who live with compassion, it's contagious. You catch yourself thinking, if they can show up like that, so can I. If you're not sure where to start, there are countless resources. Books on mindful living, podcasts that explore empathy in real life, apps that prompt you with daily kindness challenges. Choose one. Commit to it. Let it pull you deeper into this practice. The shared future. Why this matters more than ever. Here's the bigger picture. We are living in a world that feels more divided, more reactive, more suspicious than it used to. Social media algorithms reward outrage. News cycles thrive on fear. And in all of that noise, compassion can feel small, almost naive. But here's the thing, compassion isn't weakness. It's rebellion. It's refusing to be pulled into the spiral of us versus them. It's choosing to see the human in front of you instead of the label attached to them. Imagine if enough of us practiced compassion daily, not just in safe spaces, but in the hard ones. Not just toward people who think like us, but toward those who don't. That shift could ripple outward, softening conversations, healing old wounds, and maybe, just maybe, changing the way communities function. It starts with one person. It starts with you. Your call to action. So here's my challenge. For the next 7 days, make compassion your priority. Not as a nice thought, but as a deliberate act. Pick one intentional moment each day where you step out of autopilot and choose connection over convenience. And then, share it. Tell someone what happened, not to brag, but to keep the chain going. Because stories spread. They give others permission to try. This isn't about being perfect. You'll have days where you forget, where you're tired, where you're caught up in your own mess. That's okay. Compassion includes yourself, too. But if you keep showing up, something will shift, in you and in the world around you. Compassion isn't a finish line you cross. It's a road you walk, step by step. And the longer you walk it, the more you realize, this journey doesn't just change the way you see others. It changes the way you see yourself. So, will you start today?